The warning light on my console turned red 3 seconds before the whole training deck went silent. My hands were already moving before my mind caught up. The control yoke in front of me was shaking, the whole simulator pod rattling like it wanted to shake itself apart, and every eye on the observation deck above me was watching to see if I would fail. My name is Ellie Sutton. I am 22 years old, and I am the only pilot from Earth in a class of 41 cadets from 11 different worlds. Nobody expected me to be here. Most of them still did not understand why I was. The trial that day was called a gravity lock. It was the hardest test in the entire academy, and every cadet had to pass it before they could touch a real ship. The idea was simple to explain and almost impossible to survive. A shuttle gets pulled into an unstable gravity field near a collapsing star, and the pilot has to guide it out using nothing but manual controls, because at that level of gravity stress, every automated system fails. It was a simulation, but it did not feel like one. The pod shook the same way a real shuttle would shake. The straps cut into my shoulders the same way real straps would. And the fear, that was very real too. I gripped the yoke the way my father taught me, both hands low, wrists locked at an angle, elbows pulled in tight against my ribs instead of pushed forward. It looked strange. It always looked strange to people who had never seen it before. Beside me, through the thin wall of the pod, I could hear Cadet Ren Alcata laughing before his own trial even began. He had watched me practice in the training yard the day before, and had not been shy about sharing his opinion. "Your grip is wrong," he had said, loud enough for half the yard to hear. "You hold the yoke like you are trying to strangle it. No wonder the instructors keep frowning at you." I did not answer him then. I did not have time to answer him now. The simulator screen in front of me showed the collapsing star pulling the shuttle in, the numbers climbing fast, gravity stress rising past the point where every other cadet before me had lost control. My hands stayed steady. My mind went quiet in the way it always did when things got dangerous, a strange kind of calm that made everything slow down. I pulled the yoke toward my chest instead of pushing it away, the same motion my father used when he flew supply runs through storm systems back on Earth, long before I was born, back when pilots still had to fly by feel because the machines could not be trusted to save them. I twisted my wrists at the exact angle he taught me, the angle that let the shuttle roll with the gravity instead of fighting it head-on. The pod stopped shaking. For 1 full second, nobody on the observation deck said a word. Then the numbers on my screen settled, the red light turned green, and a voice came over the speaker, low and steady, belonging to Instructor Halden Voss, the man who had never once given a cadet full marks in the 11 years he had run this program. "Cadet Sutton," he said, "report to the main deck. Now." I unstrapped myself with hands that were only just beginning to shake, now that the danger was over, and walked out of the pod into a room that had gone completely silent. Every other cadet was staring at the screen above the main console, the one that showed my numbers next to the 4 previous attempts that day. 3 of them had failed. The 4th had passed, barely, with a stress score that left the pilot pale and shaking for an hour afterward. My score was not close to any of theirs. It was not close to anyone's score in the entire history of the program, though I did not know that yet. Instructor Voss walked toward me slowly, his eyes fixed on my hands instead of my face. He was a tall man with silver hair and a scar along his jaw that nobody had ever asked him about, because everyone who worked under him learned quickly not to ask questions he had not invited. "Show me your grip again," he said. I lifted my hands and repeated the motion, the low wrists, the tight elbows, the pull instead of the push. Around the room, a few cadets were still smiling, waiting for the instructor to correct me the way instructors always corrected the strange things I did. He did not correct me. He watched for a long moment, and something changed in his face, something that looked almost like recognition. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My father," I said. "He learned it from his father. It goes back a long way in my family. It is an old flying technique from Earth, from a time before ships had computers smart enough to correct a pilot's mistakes. Back then, if your hands were wrong, you did not get a second chance. So people found grips that worked, and they passed them down, generation after generation, until the ships changed and nobody needed them anymore. Except you still use it," he said. "Except I still use it," I said. He turned to the room and asked Cadet Alcata to step forward, the same cadet who had laughed at me the day before. Ren straightened his uniform and walked to the front with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted himself in this building. "Show me your grip," Instructor Voss said to him. Ren placed his hands on the demonstration yoke the standard way, the way every academy manual taught, wrists high, elbows forward, palms pushing outward to control the drift. It was the grip that 11 worlds had agreed was correct, refined over centuries of careful engineering and endless testing. Instructor Voss nodded slowly, then turned back to the room. "This grip works," he said. "It has worked for 300 years across every species in this academy. It is efficient, it is teachable, and it is safe under normal conditions. But normal conditions are not what nearly killed 4 of you today." He pointed at me. "Cadet Sutton uses a grip that no manual in this academy teaches. It looks wrong. It looks clumsy. I have watched cadets laugh at it for 11 years. Every time a human student walked through those doors holding a yoke like that, and every single time, I told myself it did not matter, because the standard grip was proven, and the old Earth grip was outdated." He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his own hands. "I was wrong," he said. "I want everyone in this room to understand exactly why." He brought up a diagram on the main screen, showing the stress lines a gravity lock puts on a shuttle's frame during the worst part of the pull. The standard grip, hands high and pushing outward, worked perfectly for gentle corrections, the kind pilots made 100 times during any normal flight. But during a true gravity lock, when the pull became violent and unpredictable, that same grip left almost no room for a sudden change in direction. The hands were already stretched to their limit before the real danger even began. The old grip, hands low and pulling inward, kept the arms in a position where they had room to move further, room to react, room to twist the yoke hard in a fraction of a second if the ship demanded it. It was not a grip built for comfort or elegance. It was built for the worst moment possible, the moment when a pilot's life depended on having just a little more room to move than anyone expected they would need. 300 years ago, Instructor Voss said, engineers on other worlds solved this problem by building smarter machines that could sense a coming disaster and correct for it before a pilot's hands even had to move. It worked so well that the old grip became unnecessary, and eventually it was forgotten everywhere except one small, struggling planet that could not afford machines that smart, and so its pilots kept solving the problem the only way they could, with their own bodies. He looked at me again. "We spent 3 centuries building better machines to avoid needing a better grip," he said. "Earth spent the same 3 centuries with no choice but to build a better grip, because they did not have the resources for anything else. And today, when every machine in that simulator failed the way real machines sometimes fail out in open space, it was the grip that saved the shuttle, not the technology." The room stayed silent. Even Ren had nothing to say. Instructor Voss turned to the class and said something I would remember for the rest of my life, something that changed the way every cadet in that room looked at me from that day forward. "We have spent 11 years teaching this academy that there is one correct way to fly," he said. "Today, Cadet Sutton proved that the correct way is whatever keeps you alive when everything else fails. From tomorrow, every pilot in this program will learn both grips, not because the old one is better in every situation, but because a pilot who only knows one way to hold a yoke is a pilot who has already lost half the fight before it even begins." He asked me to stay after the others were dismissed, and for the first time since I had arrived at the academy, he spoke to me not like an instructor speaking to a struggling cadet, but like one pilot speaking to another. "Your father," he said, "was he a supply pilot?" "Yes," I said. "For almost 30 years. He flew through storms most people would not fly through today, even with all our modern systems. He always said the storms taught him more than any training program ever could." Voss nodded slowly, like that explained something he had been wondering about for a long time. "I flew storms myself once," he said. "A different kind, on a different world, a long time ago. I understand the sort of grip that comes from that kind of flying. It does not look elegant, because it was never built to be elegant. It was built to keep a person alive when nothing else could." He looked at the scar along his jaw, and for a moment I thought he might explain it, but he did not, and I did not ask. "Get some rest, cadet," he said instead. "Tomorrow we run the gravity lock again, and I want to see if you can do it twice." I did not sleep much that night. Word of what happened had already spread through every dormitory in the academy, and by morning, cadets from other classes were coming to watch, standing along the observation deck in numbers I had never seen before for a single trial. Ren found me before the second trial began, standing near the entrance to the simulator bay with his arms crossed and an expression I could not quite read. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I laughed at something I did not understand, and I was wrong to do it. My people build the best ships in known space, but yesterday I learned that building a good ship and knowing how to fly one when everything falls apart are 2 very different things." I told him it was fine, and I meant it. I did not need an apology to feel like I belonged there. I only needed to prove, once, that I did. The second trial was harder than the first, the way second trials always are. with a gravity pull that shifted direction twice instead of once, forcing a pilot to correct not just for one collapse but for two, back to back, with almost no warning between them. I strapped into the pod with steadier hands than the day before, and when the warning light turned red, I was already moving, wrists low, elbows tight, pulling instead of pushing, feeling the shuttle roll with the pull the same way my father had felt his own ship roll through storms decades before I was born, on a world he loved enough to keep flying through weather that should have grounded every pilot brave enough to try. The first collapse came fast, and I rode it the way I had the day before. The second came faster, twisting the wrong direction entirely, and for one terrifying second I felt the yoke fight against my hands harder than anything had fought against me before. I did not let go. I pulled harder, twisted my wrists past the angle my father had taught me, past anything I had practiced, into a motion my body found on its own, because there was no other choice left. The shuttle groaned around me, the whole pod shaking so hard my vision blurred, and then, all at once, it steadied. The light turned green. When I climbed out of the pod, my legs were shaking so badly I had to hold the railing to stay standing, but the room erupted into a sound I had never heard in that academy before. Cadets from 11 different worlds clapping and calling my name, not because I was human, and not despite it, but because I had done something none of them had seen done before, and it had worked. Instructor Voss did not clap, he simply nodded at me, once, the way a man nods at someone he has decided to trust completely, and told me to get some water and rest before the afternoon session began. Over the following weeks, the academy changed in small ways that added up to something much larger. New cadets from Earth stopped hiding the way they held a yoke, stopped adjusting their grip to match the standard before instructors could see it, and started teaching each other the old techniques their families had passed down, the ones built for storms nobody flies through anymore, except when the machines fail and there is nothing left to trust but a person's own hands. Ren became one of my closest friends in that program, and more than once during late study sessions in the mess hall, he admitted that watching me fly that trial had changed the way he thought about his own species' approach to piloting. "We build machines to solve every problem before it happens," he told me one evening. "Your people build people to solve problems after they happen. I used to think our way was better. Now I think we need both." I thought about my father a lot during those weeks, about the stories he used to tell me as a child, sitting on the porch of our house back on Earth, describing storms with names I no longer remembered, describing the exact feeling of a yoke fighting back against his hands, and the exact moment he learned to stop fighting it and start moving with it instead. I never understood, as a child, why those stories mattered so much to him. I understood now. Near the end of that term, the academy held its final trial, the one every cadet had to pass to graduate into active service. It was not called a gravity lock this time. It was called a full systems failure, and it was designed to be the worst possible day any pilot could ever face. Every system down at once, no computer assistance of any kind, nothing but a person's own hands and whatever training they had managed to hold on to under pressure. I sat in the pod that day with Ren's voice in my head, telling me that our way and his way were both worth having, and my father's voice in my head, telling me that the storm does not care how elegant your grip looks, it only cares whether you let go. I did not let go. The trial lasted 4 minutes, though it felt far longer, every second stretched thin by the kind of fear that makes a person feel completely, perfectly alive. My hands moved the way they had moved my whole life, low and tight and pulling instead of pushing, finding room to react in moments when other pilots would have run out of room entirely. When the light turned green for the last time, I sat still in the pod for a moment before unstrapping myself, letting the silence settle over me the way it always did after a storm passed. Instructor Voss was waiting for me when I stepped out, and this time, for the first time in the entire program, he smiled. "Your father taught you well," he said. "He taught me everything," I said. "I just had to be brave enough to use it in a place that told me it was wrong." He nodded, and then he said something I have carried with me every day since, something I try to pass on now to every new cadet who walks through those doors holding a yoke the way their own family taught them, unsure whether anyone here will laugh or listen. "The people who change everything," he said, "are rarely the ones who fit in perfectly from the very first day. They are the ones who hold on to what makes them different, long enough for the rest of us to understand why it matters." I graduated from that academy 3 months later, the first pilot from Earth to finish at the top of a class made up of cadets from 11 different worlds. I still fly with the same grip my father taught me, low wrists, tight elbows, pulling instead of pushing, and these days, I am not the only one. Half the pilots in my current unit fly that way now, humans and non-humans both, because a strange grip that once made an entire training deck fall silent turned out to be exactly the thing that saved every single one of us on the one day it mattered most.